The city was wrapped in a thick, gray blanket of fog that afternoon, the kind of damp chill that seeps right through your coat and settles into your bones. It wasn't a freezing day, but it was the kind of wet that makes everything feel heavy and slow. On the corner of 4th Street, there was a small diner. It wasn't a fancy place. The neon sign in the window buzzed with a faint, flickering orange light, and the windows were steamy from the heat of the grills inside. To most people walking by, it was just another place to grab a cheap burger and a cup of coffee to warm up. But for Keanu, it felt like a sanctuary. Keanu stood outside for a moment, adjusting the collar of his jacket. He pulled his baseball cap down lower over his eyes. It wasn't that he hated being recognized, but today wasn't about being a movie star. Today was just about being a dad. He looked down at the young girl in the wheelchair beside him. Her name was Luna. She had soft, dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the world, even though she was only young. She was bundled up in a thick blanket, her hands resting in her lap, twitching slightly with movements she couldn't quite control. "You ready, Loon?" Keanu asked softly, his voice low and rough. Luna looked up at him and smiled. It was a small movement, but it lit up her whole face. She made a soft sound, a hum of happiness that made Keanu's chest tighten. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Let's get some food," he said. Keanu pushed the heavy chair toward the glass door. It was a battle. The chair was built for safety and comfort, which meant it was made of steel and weighed a ton. Adding the weight of a grown child didn't make it easier. The sidewalk was uneven, cracked by old tree roots, and the front wheels of the chair caught in a groove. Keanu had to lean his whole weight forward, using his legs and back to jerk the chair over the bump. His boots slipped slightly on the wet pavement, but he regained his balance. He didn't complain. He never complained. He just gritted his teeth, took a breath, and kept going. He reached for the door handle. It was one of those old, heavy metal handles that sticks when it's humid. He pulled, but it didn't budge. He tried again, putting his shoulder into it, while keeping one hand firm on the wheelchair handle to stop Luna from rolling backward into the street. The door gave a sudden screech and flew open, hitting the stopper with a loud clang. A bell above the door dinged sharply. Every head in the diner turned to look. Keanu froze for a split second. He felt the familiar wave of anxiety that washed over him whenever he entered a public space. He saw the eyes widen. He saw the whispers start between the couples in the booths. He saw a young guy near the counter nudge his friend and pull out his phone. "Camera ready?" Keanu didn't make eye contact. He focused entirely on Luna. He maneuvered the chair through the narrow entrance, turning it sideways to fit past a rack of potato chips and a rack of magazines. It was a tight squeeze. The wheel scraped against the metal rack with a horrible noise. Keanu winced, whispering an apology to no one, but he kept moving. He just wanted to get to a table. He just wanted to disappear. The diner was noisy. The clatter of silverware against plates, the hissing of the coffee machine, the loud laughter from a group of businessmen in the back. It was overwhelming. Keanu knew that Luna struggled with loud noises. He saw her flinch, her hands coming up to cover her ears slightly, her body tensing up. "It's okay," he whispered, leaning down close to her ear so she could hear him over the din. "We're okay. Just focus on me, Luna." He walked toward the hostess station. A young woman with bright pink hair and a tired smile looked up. Her eyes went wide when she saw who was standing there. She opened her mouth, probably to say his name or ask for a selfie, but Keanu spoke first. "Hi," he said quickly, politely, but with a look that said he didn't want a fuss. Just two, please. Somewhere quiet if you have it. A corner would be great. The hostess blinked, caught off guard by his haste. She looked at the wheelchair, then back at his face. She saw the dark circles under his eyes. She saw the way his shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. Yeah, sure, she stammered, grabbing two menus. Follow me. She led them through the maze of tables. Keanu had to be careful not to bump into people's chairs as he passed. He murmured excuse me and sorry every few seconds. He felt huge and clumsy in the small space. He felt like he was taking up too much room, causing too much trouble. It was a feeling he knew too well. No matter how famous he became, or how much money he had, in this moment, he was just a dad trying to navigate a world that wasn't built for his daughter. They reached a booth in the back corner. It was slightly quieter there, away from the kitchen door. But there was a problem. The table was bolted to the floor, and there wasn't enough space between the table and the bench for the wheelchair to pull in. Keanu would have to get Luna out of the chair and carry her to the bench. Keanu looked at the bench. It was high, and the padding was slick. He looked at Luna. Her legs didn't work well, and her torso was weak. Transferring her was always a difficult, careful dance where one wrong move could mean a fall or a painful injury for her, or a thrown out back for him. He was tired. His back was already throbbing from the walk here. Actually, Keanu said, stopping the hostess. Can we take this chair, the one at the end of the row? It has movable chairs. He pointed to a small table for two near the window. It was wobbly, and it was right next to the drafty window, but it had regular wooden chairs that could be moved out of the way. Of course, the hostess said, looking relieved she didn't have to figure out the booth situation. They moved to the smaller table. Keanu locked the brakes on the wheelchair. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He bent his knees, getting into a squat position rather than bending at the waist. His physiotherapist had drilled that into him 1,000 times. He reached his arms under Luna's arms. Okay, Lune. 1, 2, 3, he counted. Luna tried to help, pushing up with her legs as best she could, but mostly it was Keanu's strength. He lifted her, feeling that familiar weight in his arms, the weight he would carry to the ends of the earth. He turned and lowered her gently into the wooden chair. He tucked a pillow behind her back to support her. She slumped a little to the left, so he adjusted the pillow again. Better, he asked. Luna nodded, looking around the diner with wide eyes. Keanu collapsed the wheelchair and leaned it against the wall behind him, out of the way of the walkway. He sat down opposite her. He let out a long, shaky breath that he had been holding in since they left the apartment. He took off his wet cap and ran a hand through his hair. He looked at the menu. It was laminated, sticky, and covered in fingerprints. The letters were small, squeezed together. He tried to focus on the words, but his eyes were blurry. He was so tired. It was a deep, bone tired that sleep didn't seem to fix. It was the tiredness of worry, of constant vigilance, of always being on. He looked at Luna. She was tapping her fingers on the table, a rhythmic, repetitive motion. She was looking at the menu, but he knew she couldn't read the small text very well. She couldn't hold the menu steady either. Her hands would shake, and the laminate would slip against her palms. What sounds good, buddy? Keanu asked, forcing a cheerful tone. Pancakes, eggs. Luna made a sound, pointing a trembling finger at a picture of a stack of pancakes. Pancakes it is, Keanu said. And some bacon. She nodded enthusiastically. Keanu signaled for a waitress. He saw one coming their way. She looked young, maybe 22 or 23. She had her hair tied back in a messy bun, a pen stuck through it. She was carrying a tray full of dirty dishes from a nearby table. She looked frazzled. Her shirt was stained with a splash of ketchup near the pocket. Keanu felt a pang of sympathy. He knew what it was like to work hard, to be on your feet all day, to smile when you just wanted to sit down. The waitress dropped off the dishes at the kitchen window and wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over to their table, pulling a notepad out of her pocket. As she got closer, she looked at her notepad, then looked up. Her steps faltered. She stopped dead for a second. She looked at Keanu, then at Luna, then back at Keanu. Her mouth opened slightly in shock. "Hi," Keanu said, giving her a small, tired smile. "How are you today?" The waitress blinked rapidly, recovering her composure. I'm good. Just busy." "Hi. I mean, welcome." She looked at Luna. Luna was trying to pick up a sugar packet, but her fingers kept fumbling, the packet sliding across the table. Luna let out a frustrated sigh, a small huff of air. Keanu reached over and steadied the packet for her, placing it in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "It's okay, Luna. We have time." The waitress watched this interaction. She didn't ask for an autograph. She didn't pull out her phone. She just watched the way Keanu looked at his daughter. It wasn't the look of a celebrity. It was the look of a father who was devoted, but who was also running on empty. "Are you folks ready to order?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Yeah," Keanu said. "She'll have the short stack of pancakes. With syrup on the side, please, not on top. She likes to dip. And some bacon, crispy but not burnt." "Got it," the waitress said, scribbling on her pad. "And for you?" "Just a coffee," Keanu said. "Black. And maybe a water." "Sure thing," she said. She looked at Luna again. Luna was trying to unfold the napkin, but her hands were shaking too much, crumpling the paper into a ball instead of a square. Her face was starting to scrunch up. She was getting upset. Keanu saw it immediately. It was the start of a meltdown, the frustration of her body not obeying her brain. Keanu reached across the small table. "Here, let me help with that, honey." He took the crumpled napkin and smoothed it out on her lap. But his hand hit his water glass, knocking it over. The ice water spilled across the table, rushing toward Luna's lap. "No!" Keanu shouted, reacting on instinct. He lunged forward, grabbing his own napkin to try and block the water from soaking Luna's clothes. He bumped the table hard with his hip. The salt and pepper shakers rattled and fell over. The silverware clattered to the floor. The noise seemed to stop the entire diner. Conversations halted. People stared. Keanu managed to stop the water from hitting Luna, but now he was soaked. His sleeve was dripping. The table was a mess. Water was dripping off the edge onto the floor. Luna started to cry. Not a loud scream, but a soft, whimpering cry. The noise, the spill, the frustration, it was all too much. She covered her face with her hands. Keanu sat there, water dripping from his elbow, looking at his crying daughter and the mess he had made. He felt his face get hot with shame. He felt like he couldn't do anything right. He felt like everyone was judging him. Look at the movie star, he imagined them thinking. He can't even take care of his own kid without causing a disaster. I'm sorry, Keanu whispered to Luna, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so clumsy. He grabbed a handful of napkins from the dispenser and started frantically wiping the table, trying to clean it up, but he was just making it wetter. He felt helpless. He felt trapped. He just wanted to be invisible again. He felt a lump forming in his throat, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. This was the reality. It wasn't red carpets and premiere nights. It was spilled water and crying children and wet sleeves and the crushing weight of feeling like you weren't enough. He looked around for the waitress, feeling panic rising in his chest. He needed more napkins. He needed help. He felt small. He felt alone in a crowded room. And then, he saw the waitress stepping out from behind the counter. She wasn't holding a notepad anymore. She was holding a whole stack of clean, white towels. She wasn't looking at the mess with annoyance. She was looking at him. And her eyes were kind. She walked toward the table, moving with a purpose that cut through the noise and the staring. Keanu watched her come, feeling like he was waiting for a judge to hand down a sentence, but for some reason, the look on her face made him think that maybe, just maybe, the verdict wasn't going to be bad. The young woman didn't walk to the table, she practically speed-walked, arriving with a stack of white towels in her hands. She didn't look annoyed. She didn't look at the mess on the floor with disgust. Instead, her eyes were locked on Luna. She saw the tears streaming down the little girl's face. She saw the way Keanu was frantically trying to dab the water away with flimsy paper napkins that were dissolving in his hands. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and cut right through the noise of the diner. "Don't worry about the mess. Accidents happen." She knelt down on the wet floor, not caring that the knees of her uniform pants were soaking up the spilled water. She began to scoop the ice cubes up with her hands, tossing them into an empty bus tub she had brought with her. She worked quickly and efficiently. Keanu stopped his frantic wiping and just watched her, his chest heaving slightly. "I'm so sorry," Keanu said again, his voice quiet. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." The waitress looked up at him and offered a small, genuine smile. It wasn't the polite fake smile that waiters give to customers they don't like. It was real. "Please, don't apologize. It's just water. It dries. Is she okay?" She looked at Luna, who was still sniffling, her hands over her eyes. "She's just overwhelmed," Keanu said, reaching out to stroke Luna's hair. "The noise and the spill, it's a lot for her." The waitress nodded knowingly. She finished wiping the table with a thick cloth, making sure the surface was dry. Then, she stood up and looked directly at Luna. She didn't talk down to her, the way adults sometimes talk to disabled children. She didn't use a baby voice. "Hey," she said softly. "I really like your shirt. That color looks great on you." Luna slowly lowered her hands. She peeked through her fingers. The waitress was leaning against the table, relaxed, not hovering over her. It was a less threatening posture. Luna looked at her shirt, then back at the waitress. The crying stopped, replaced by a shaky breath. "I'm sorry about the loud noise," the waitress continued. "I dropped a tray once. It sounded like a bomb went off. I almost cried, too." A tiny smile tugged at the corner of Luna's mouth. "That's better," the waitress said. She turned to Keanu. "I'll go get that coffee for you. Black, right, and a fresh water for the lady." "Thank you, Keanu said. He felt the tension in his shoulders drop by a fraction. The chaos of the moment had passed, replaced by this stranger's calm competence. She returned a moment later with a steaming mug and a small glass of juice for Luna, instead of water, knowing that sugar might help settle the little girl's nerves. She set them down gently. "I'll put your order in now," she said. "It shouldn't be long." She walked away, and Keanu finally let out the breath he felt like he'd been holding for hours. He looked at Luna. She was calm now, tracing the pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. He took a sip of his coffee. It was hot and bitter, but it grounded him. He watched the diner around them. The staring had stopped. People had gone back to their burgers and their conversations. The incident was over. A few minutes later, the smell of pancakes and bacon drifted over to the table. The waitress came back carrying a large plate. She set it down in front of Keanu. "Here we go," she said. "Stack of pancakes, syrup on the side, crispy bacon." Keanu nodded. "Thanks. We're good now." He picked up his knife and fork. He intended to cut the pancakes into small, bite-sized squares for Luna, the way he always did. But his hand was trembling slightly. The adrenaline from the spill was fading, leaving him feeling weak and shaky. He sawed at the pancake, but the knife dragged on the plate. It was a struggle. He felt clumsy again. Luna watched him, waiting. She was hungry. She let out a small, impatient sound, tapping her hand on the table. I know, Keanu murmured. "Daddy's trying." He tried to steady his wrist with his other hand, but the position was awkward. The booth was tight, and the table was wobbly. He felt that familiar wave of frustration rising in his chest again. Why couldn't he just do this one simple thing? Why did everything have to be so hard? Suddenly, a hand reached out from beside him. "Mind if I steal a bite?" Keanu looked up. It was the waitress again. She had come back to check on them, but instead of just asking how is everything, she saw the struggle. She saw the fatigue etched deep into Keanu's face. She saw the way his hands were shaking. Before Keanu could answer, she gently took the knife and fork from his loose grip. "Here," she said. "Let me help. You drink your coffee. It looks like you need it more than I need to stand here." "You really don't have to," Keanu started to say, but she was already moving. "I know I don't have to," she said, cutting through the stack of pancakes with precision. "But I want to. My little brother has trouble with his hands, too. I got pretty good at the prep work." She didn't make a big deal out of it. She didn't make him feel like he was incapable. She just stepped in and filled the gap. She cut the pancakes into perfect squares. Then, she took a small piece of bacon, broke it into bits, and arranged it all neatly on the side of the plate. She looked at Luna. "All right, young lady. Ready for takeoff?" She picked up a fork, speared a piece of syrup-dipped pancake, and held it out. But Luna didn't open her mouth immediately. She looked at Keanu, seeking his permission. "It's okay, Lune," Keanu said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's helping us." Luna turned back to the waitress. She leaned forward and took the bite. The waitress waited, watching Luna chew, making sure she wasn't choking. When Luna swallowed and smiled, the waitress beamed. "Good?" she asked. Luna nodded enthusiastically. "More," she whispered. The waitress fed her another bite. And another. She talked to Luna while she did it. She didn't talk about the weather or the food. She asked Luna about the doll she had strapped to the wheelchair. She asked her if she liked the song playing on the radio. She treated Luna like a normal kid, just one who happened to need a little help with lunch. Keanu sat back and watched. He took a long drink of his coffee. For the first time in he didn't know how long, his hands were empty. He wasn't cutting, or wiping, or holding, or steering. He was just sitting. He was watching his daughter eat and laugh. He saw the way Luna's eyes lit up as the waitress made a silly face about the bacon. It was such a small thing, a stranger feeding a child lunch. But to Keanu, it felt massive. It felt like someone had taken a heavy backpack off his shoulders, if only for 10 minutes. He looked at the young woman. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, too. Her uniform looked worn. She moved with the slight stiffness of someone who spent all day on her feet, but her energy was warm and giving. She must have felt him looking at her, because she glanced over at him while she was loading the fork with more bacon. She smiled, but it was a curious smile. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said gently. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Keanu let out a short, dry laugh. "It feels like longer," he admitted. It's a lot. You know, trying to make sure everything is okay for her." "I can imagine," she said. She fed Luna another bite and wiped a tiny spot of syrup from the girl's chin with a napkin. "She's lucky to have you. You're really patient with her. I see a lot of parents in here, and they yell at their kids for just being kids. You're gentle." Keanu looked down at his coffee cup, embarrassed by the compliment. "I lose my patience sometimes," he said quietly, "like with the water. I hate when she sees me frustrated." "She didn't see you frustrated," the waitress said. "She saw you trying to fix it. There's a difference. Besides, kids are resilient. They feel what you feel. If you're scared, they're scared. If you're calm, they're calm." She paused, looking around the diner to make sure no other tables needed her, then looked back at him. "I get it, though. The tiredness. I'm working a double shift today. I have a little boy at home. He's with my aunt, but I miss him. I hate missing the moments." "You're a single mom?" Keanu asked. "Yeah," she said, focusing on cutting up the last pancake. "His dad isn't really in the picture. It's just us. It's hard to find a balance between working to keep a roof over his head and actually being there to raise him. Some days I feel like I'm failing at both." Keanu looked at her with new eyes. He saw the worn shoes. He saw the way she kept checking the clock on the wall. She wasn't just a kind stranger. She was a warrior, fighting her own battles, just like he was. And yet, here she was, taking time out of her chaotic day to make his life a little easier. "You're not failing," Keanu said firmly. "Look at what you're doing right now. You're taking care of people. That counts." The waitress shrugged, but her cheeks turned a little pink. "It's just pancakes." "It's not just pancakes," Keanu said. "It's peace. You gave us peace." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second, the noise of the diner faded away. It was just two parents, acknowledging the difficulty of the road they were walking. She nodded slowly. "Yeah. I guess you're right." She scraped the last bit of pancake onto the fork and fed it to Luna, who made a show of rubbing her belly to show she was full. "All done?" the waitress asked. "Good job. You were a great eater." She picked up the plate. Can I get you guys anything else, maybe a refill on that coffee? Keanu shook his head. No, this is perfect. Thank you. Really, thank you. Don't mention it, she said, stacking the dish on her arm. It made my shift better, actually. It's nice to talk to someone who gets it. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, disappearing through the swinging doors. Keanu watched her go. The air around the table felt lighter. The heavy gray fog that had been clouding his mind seemed to have lifted. He looked at Luna. She was playing with the sugar packet again, calm and content. Full? Keanu asked. Luna nodded. She looked up at her dad. Nice lady, she said clearly. Yeah, Keanu said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. She is a very nice lady. He felt a sudden urge to do something. He couldn't just leave a tip. That didn't feel like enough. Not for the peace of mind she had given him. Not for the way she had treated his daughter like a human being, not a burden. He reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed against his wallet. He was about to pull out cash to settle the bill, but he hesitated. He looked toward the kitchen doors where she had disappeared. He realized he had something else in his pocket, something he rarely carried, but today he had it. He pulled out a small, leather business card holder. Inside, there were a few cards. They were simple, just a name and a number. But he knew that number was a gateway to a world where money wasn't a problem. But he pushed the cards back. It felt too impersonal. Too much like a transaction. He wanted to give her something real. He looked at the check she had dropped on the table. He reached for his pen. Keanu sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the diner, feeling the warmth of the coffee in his stomach, and the overwhelming gratitude in his heart. He knew exactly what he was going to do. It wasn't going to be a grand gesture for the cameras. There were no cameras here. It was going to be a quiet thank you between two people trying to do their best in a hard world. He uncapped his pen and began to write on the paper napkin under the check. The empty plate sat on the table, the last traces of syrup wiped clean by the waitress's cloth. The diner was still humming with the noise of lunch hour, the clinking of silverware, the sharp shout of orders being called from the kitchen window, the low murmur of 100 different conversations. But inside their little bubble in the corner booth, everything was quiet and still. Keanu leaned back against the hardwood of the bench, stretching his legs out under the table. He felt a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in months. Usually, by this time of the day, his shoulders would be knotted into tight ropes of tension, and his jaw would be clenched so hard his teeth ached. But right now, looking at Luna, who was busy arranging the little jelly packets on the table in a neat line, he felt almost human again. The waitress came back to the table. She was carrying a small pot of coffee in one hand and a wet rag in the other. She had a name tag on her chest that simply read Chloe. She looked a little less rushed than before, her shoulders slightly dropped, as if she had stolen a moment to breathe while she was in the back. Refill? She asked, holding the pot up. Keanu looked at his cup. He knew he should probably get going. He had a meeting later that he wasn't looking forward to, and the traffic in the city would be getting bad soon, especially with the rain. But the idea of walking back out into that cold, gray world felt wrong. It felt like breaking a spell. Sure, he said. Just half a cup, though. I don't want to bounce off the walls. Chloe smiled and poured the dark liquid. She set the pot down on an empty table nearby and started to wipe down the surface of their booth. She moved with a practiced ease, her eyes flicking over to Luna to make sure she wasn't in the way. She's really good with those patterns, Chloe said softly, nodding toward the line of jelly packets Luna was meticulously arranging by color. Red, yellow, purple. Red, yellow, purple. Yeah, Keanu said, watching his daughter. She likes order. It helps her feel safe. When things are chaotic, she organizes things. It calms her down. I get that, Chloe said, leaning her hip against the table. She looked tired, Keanu noticed. Not just the tiredness from a long shift, but a deep kind of tiredness that comes from worrying too much. Sometimes I clean my apartment at 3 in the morning just because I can't turn my brain off. Folding towels, lining up shoes. It makes me feel like I have control over something, you know. Keanu looked at her closely. He saw a smudge of flour on her cheek and a small run in her black tights. She looked like she was holding the weight of the world on her shoulders, just like he was. It's hard, Keanu said. Trying to hold everything together. Chloe laughed, a short, dry sound. Tell me about it. My rent went up 2 months ago. My landlord says it's market adjustments, but I call it impossible. I'm working doubles here 3 times a week, plus I pick up a shift at a bakery on Sundays. I'm tired all the time. I feel like I'm missing out on my own life, you know. She stopped talking suddenly, her eyes going wide as she realized she was complaining to a customer and a famous one at that. She shook her head quickly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be dumping my problems on you. You're here to eat lunch, not listen to me complain about bills. No, Keanu said, shaking his head just as quickly. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Please, don't apologize. I'd rather listen to you than talk about the weather. Honestly. It's nice to just talk to someone real. He looked out the window for a second. The rain was coming down harder now, beating against the glass in rhythmic sheets. People outside were running with umbrellas, heads down, coats pulled tight. People think that because they see you in a movie, or they see your face on a poster, that your life is perfect, Keanu said, his voice low, almost a whisper. They think money fixes everything. But it doesn't fix the scary stuff. It doesn't fix the loneliness. It doesn't fix the worry. He looked back at Chloe. I look at Luna, and I wonder what happens when I'm gone. Who will cut her pancakes? Who will make sure she's safe? Money can't buy a person who actually cares. Chloe stopped wiping the table. She stood still, looking at him with a soft, serious expression. She saw past the famous jawline and the dark eyes. She saw a scared father. You're doing a good job, she said firmly. She knows you love her. I've only known you for 20 minutes, and I can see that. You're here. You're present. That's more than a lot of kids get, rich or poor. Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He swallowed it down hard. Thank you, he managed to say. Don't mention it, Chloe said, tossing the rag into a bin. She looked out the window and sighed. I hate to say it, but you guys should probably get going if you want to miss the worst of it. The Weather Channel says a storm is rolling in. The wind is picking up. Keanu looked at the rain. It was indeed looking nasty. He dreaded the struggle of getting the wheelchair out to the car in a downpour. He dreaded the cold, wet drive home. Are you taking the bus? He asked Chloe. She nodded. Yeah. My stop is about 8 blocks away. I usually walk it to get some fresh air, but in this. She gestured to the window. I think I'm going to run. You don't have a car. I did, she said, shrugging like it didn't matter, even though Keanu could tell it did. It died a glorious death about 3 months ago. The transmission went. It would have cost more to fix than the car was worth. Now I'm a two-legged commuter. She looked at her watch. Actually, my break is over. I should get back to the grind. Wait, Keanu said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a battered old leather thing, the edges worn smooth. He opened it and pulled out a few bills to pay for the check. He laid them on the table. Keep the change, he said. Chloe looked down. It was a generous tip, maybe enough to cover her bus fare for a week, but it wasn't outrageous. It wasn't movie star money. She looked back at him, surprised. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to, Keanu said. You made a hard day easier. That's worth more than you know. He stood up slowly. His joints popped a little, a reminder of the years of action movies and stunts, and the heavy lifting he did every day for Luna. He walked over to the wheelchair and unlocked the brakes. You ready to go, Loon? He asked. Luna looked up from her jelly packet masterpiece. She looked at Keanu, then at Chloe. She raised a small hand and waved. Bye, Luna said. Chloe smiled, a big, bright smile that reached her eyes. Bye, Luna. You take care of your dad, okay? Luna nodded seriously. Keanu maneuvered the chair backward, turning it toward the aisle. He felt the eyes of the room on him again as he moved, but he didn't care as much this time. He felt lighter. He felt seen. They reached the front door. The hostess with the pink hair waved goodbye. Keanu pushed the handlebar, bracing himself for the cold. He looked out the glass. The wind was howling now, bending the trees on the street. The rain was sideways. He looked back toward the kitchen doors. He thought about Chloe, walking 8 blocks in the storm in worn-out shoes. He thought about her rent going up. He thought about her kindness, how she had stepped in without being asked and saved his dignity. He couldn't just leave. He remembered the feeling of being broke, of standing in the rain waiting for a bus that never came, the cold wetness seeping into his socks. He had been there. He knew that feeling of hopelessness. Stay here for 1 second, Luna, he said softly. He parked the wheelchair near the entrance, out of the way of the draft. He walked back to the counter. The diner was busy, the lunch rush in full swing. He saw Chloe rushing around with a tray of drinks. He waited for a moment for her to set it down. When she turned around, he was there. Mr. Reeves, she asked, looking confused. Did you forget something? I didn't forget anything, he said. He reached into his pocket. But this time, he didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out an envelope he had stuffed in there earlier that morning. It was intended for a donation, or maybe a tip for a driver, but now, it felt like it had a different purpose. He held it out to her. Take this, he said. Chloe looked at the thick white envelope. What is this? It's not for me, he said gently. It's for you. For the bus. And for the rent. And maybe for a warm coat. She didn't take it. She held her hands up, shaking her head. No. No, I can't. You already tipped me. That was enough. I was just doing my job. You didn't just do your job, Keanu insisted, stepping closer. You saw me. You saw her. You were kind. Kindness is rare, Chloe. It's the most valuable thing there is. Please. Take it. Don't make me beg. He pushed the envelope into her hand. She looked down at it. It was heavy. Much heavier than a few bills. She looked back up at him, her eyes wide and wet with sudden tears. I don't know what to say. Just pay it forward, Keanu said. Someday, when you're on your feet, when you have your car back, help someone else who is stuck in the rain. That's all I ask. He squeezed her hand once, warm and firm, and then turned away before she could say anything else. He didn't want her to thank him. He didn't want to make a scene. He just wanted her to have it. He walked back to the wheelchair. Luna looked up at him, her eyes questioning. We're going now, honey, he said. Big adventure in the rain. He pushed the door open. The wind hit him instantly, cold and sharp, whipping his hair across his face. The rain soaked his jacket in seconds. He maneuvered the chair down the small ramp, fighting the wind. They reached the curb. His car was parked down the block. He looked back at the diner window one last time. Through the steam and the rain, he could see Chloe standing by the counter. She was holding the envelope to her chest, staring out at him. He raised a hand in a silent wave. Then, he turned his collar up against the storm and pushed the wheelchair toward the car, ready to face the rest of the day. Inside, Chloe was still standing there, staring at the rain streaking the glass, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. It wasn't just money. It was hope. She took a deep breath, wiped a tear from her cheek, and put the envelope in her apron pocket, right next to her pen. She had a shift to finish. The heavy glass door swung shut with a thud, cutting off the wind and the noise of the storm. The bell above the door gave one final, lonely ding and then fell silent. Inside the diner, the air was warm and smelled strongly of frying bacon and old coffee. For a second, nobody moved. Everyone was staring at the spot where the movie star had just been standing. But the moment didn't last long. In a diner, life moves fast. The man in the booth by the window went back to reading his newspaper. The couple in the corner resumed their argument about money. The hum of conversation rose up again, filling the room like water filling a glass. But for the waitress, the world had stopped spinning. She stood behind the counter, her hands pressed flat against the surface to stop them from shaking. The white envelope felt heavy in her pocket. It was burning a hole in the fabric of her apron, like a hot coal. She could feel the corners of the paper against her hip. It didn't feel real. It felt like she was dreaming, or like she had stepped into a movie herself. Did he just leave? A voice asked from behind her. It was the cook, a big man with a thick mustache and arms covered in burns. He was leaning over the service window, looking out toward the street. The waitress jumped. She nodded, unable to find her voice for a second. Yeah. He left. Did he sign anything? The cook asked, his eyes wide. I've got a bet going with the dishwasher that it's really him. He didn't sign anything, she said quietly. He just left. She turned away from the window. She needed to move. She needed to think. But the lunch rush was starting. The tables were filling up with people escaping the rain. The bell was dinging constantly as new customers came in, shaking their wet umbrellas and tracking mud onto the floor. Table 4 needs refills. The hostess yelled from the front. I'm on it, the waitress said automatically. Her body went into work mode. She grabbed the coffee pot. She moved from table to table, filling cups, wiping up spills, taking orders. But her heart wasn't in it. Her mind was back in the corner booth, replaying the last few minutes over and over again. She saw the tiredness in Keanu's eyes. She felt the weight of the envelope being pushed into her hand. She heard his voice telling her to pay it forward. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She had to know. She had to see. Taking my break, she shouted to the manager, not waiting for an answer. She walked quickly to the back of the diner, pushing through the swinging door that led to the small, cramped break room. It was noisy in here, too, the loud clatter of the dishwasher, the hiss of the espresso machine in the corner, but it was private. She sat down on the old, sagging sofa that smelled of French fries and cleaning spray. She pulled the envelope out of her pocket. It was a plain white envelope, standard office supply. Nothing fancy. No writing on the outside. Just the flap tucked in. Her fingers were trembling so badly that she fumbled with it, nearly dropping it on the floor. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay. It's probably just a nice note. Or maybe a gift card. She took a deep breath and slid her finger under the flap. She ripped it open. She turned the envelope upside down. A thick stack of bills slid out into her hand. It wasn't a gift card. It wasn't $20. It wasn't even $100. It was a brick of cash. Hundreds. Fifties. More money than she made in 2 months of working double shifts. She stared at it, her mouth open. She counted it once, then counted it again, thinking she had made a mistake. $5,000. She felt the blood drain from her face. She sat back hard against the sofa. $5,000. The number bounced around in her head, refusing to make sense. This was her rent for 4 months. This was a used car. This was a year of groceries for her son. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden. She didn't cry because she was sad. She cried because she was scared. This kind of thing didn't happen to people like her. People like her struggled. People like her walked 8 blocks in the rain because they missed the bus. People like her counted pennies at the grocery store to see if they could afford the good bread. They didn't get handed $5,000 by a movie star in a diner. She looked at the empty envelope. There was a piece of paper folded inside. She pulled it out. It was a receipt from the check, but on the back, in messy, hurried handwriting, were a few words. For the bus, the rent, and the rainy days. Thank you for your kindness. K. She pressed the paper to her chest. The tears were flowing freely now, streaming down her cheeks and dripping onto her work shirt. She didn't care. She sat there in the noisy, smelly break room, holding a fortune in her lap, and wept with relief. The worry that had been crushing her chest for months, the panic about the landlord, the stress about the broken car, the fear that she was failing her son, it all lifted. Just like that. It was gone. She could breathe again. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Keanu was driving through the storm. The windshield wipers were working furiously, slapping back and forth, but the rain was coming down too hard. The tail lights of the cars in front of him were red blurs in the gray mist. The traffic was crawling. Every few seconds, brake lights flared up, painting the wet road in a crimson glow. Luna was asleep in the back seat. She was strapped into her special car seat, her head tilted to the side, her breathing soft and steady. She looked so peaceful when she slept, her mouth slightly open. It was the only time she wasn't fighting against her own body. Keanu looked at her in the rearview mirror. He felt a pang of guilt about the morning. He hated when she saw him frustrated. He hated that she had to deal with a father who was sometimes overwhelmed by his own life, but he also thought about the waitress. He wondered where she was right now. He hoped she had opened the envelope. He hoped she wasn't too proud to spend it. He remembered a time, many years ago, when he had nothing. He remembered living in a small, cramped apartment, eating noodles for dinner every night because he couldn't afford anything else. He remembered the feeling of being invisible, of walking down the street and having people look right through you. And he remembered the small kindnesses. The friend who bought him a sandwich. The director who gave him a ride home in the rain. The strangers who didn't treat him like a loser, even though he felt like one. That was why he did it. It wasn't about the money. The money was just paper. It was about the message. The message was, I see you. You matter. Your life is hard, and you are doing a great job. He didn't want a thank you. He didn't want a press release. He just wanted her to have a good night. The car in front of him stopped suddenly. Keanu slammed on his brakes. The car slid slightly on the wet pavement, but he caught it just in time. Luna stirred in her sleep but didn't wake up. Keanu let out a long sigh. He gripped the steering wheel tight. He was tired. His back hurt from lifting Luna. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. But for the first time all day, his heart felt light. He had done something good today. He couldn't fix Luna's disability, and he couldn't fix the world, but he could fix one person's Tuesday. And that had to be enough. Back at the diner, the afternoon wore on. The waitress emerged from the break room after splashing cold water on her face. She had stuffed the cash deep into her wallet, which she then locked in her locker. She felt different now. She felt taller. When she walked out onto the floor, the diner looked different. The dirty floors didn't seem so grim. The rude customers didn't seem so annoying. She went over to table 7, where an old man was complaining that his soup was cold. "I'm so sorry about that, sir," she said. Her voice was warm and steady. "Let me get you a fresh bowl, right from the pot. And I'll bring you some fresh bread while you wait." The man blinked, surprised by her kindness. He stopped complaining. "Oh. Well, thank you, young lady." She walked away with a smile. She realized that Keanu had given her something more than money. He had given her back her patience. He had reminded her that everyone was fighting a hard battle. The old man wasn't just a grumpy customer, he was probably lonely. She had the power to make his day better, just like Keanu had made hers better. She worked through the rest of her shift in a daze of happiness. Every time she touched the pocket of her apron, she felt a little spark of joy. When her shift finally ended, the rain had stopped. The sky was still dark, but the storm had passed. The city was wet and shiny, reflecting the street lights like mirrors. She clocked out, said goodbye to her co-workers, and stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp. Usually, she would dread the walk to the bus stop. She would worry about her aching feet and the long wait in the cold. But tonight, she didn't care. She walked down the sidewalk, humming softly to herself. She thought about her son. He was at her sister's house. She decided she wouldn't take the bus. She hailed a taxi, something she never did. "Where to?" the driver asked. She gave him her address. She sat back in the leather seat and watched the city go by. She felt like a princess in a carriage. She knew that tomorrow she would pay the rent. She would call the mechanic about the car. She would buy her son the new winter coat he had been asking for. It wasn't just a financial fix. It was a life fix. She got home and opened the door. Her sister was there, looking tired. Her son ran to her, hugging her legs tight. "Mommy! You're home." She picked him up, holding him close. "I'm home, baby. I'm home." She looked around the small apartment. It was messy. It was small. But it was filled with love. And tonight, it was filled with hope. She went to bed that night with a smile on her face. She thought about Keanu Reeves, the actor. She thought about the quiet man in the baseball cap. She whispered a thank you to the empty room, thanking the universe for bringing them together. She fell asleep dreaming of pancakes and yellow raincoats. She woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping. The sun was streaming through the window, making the dust motes dance in the light. It was going to be a beautiful day. She got up, stretched, and got ready for work. She felt a new energy in her step. She put on her uniform, tied her apron strings, and walked out the door. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she knew she could handle it. She walked the 8 blocks to the diner, enjoying the sunshine. When she turned the corner onto the street where the diner was, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. There were cars parked everywhere. Not just the usual cars. Nice cars. Black SUVs with tinted windows. There was a crowd gathered near the entrance. People were pointing and taking pictures with their phones. The waitress frowned. What was going on? Had there been an accident? Was a celebrity filming a movie? She pushed her way through the crowd. "Excuse me," she said. "I work here. Let me through." People recognized her. They moved aside, whispering. She stepped into the clearing in front of the diner and looked toward the employee parking lot. Her jaw dropped. Sitting there, in the parking spot that was usually reserved for the manager, was a car. But it wasn't just any car. It was a brand new SUV, gleaming in the sunlight. It was silver and shiny, with big black tires and pristine paint. And there was a giant red bow tied around the hood. The waitress stood there, frozen. She couldn't breathe. She looked at the crowd, then back at the car. She felt dizzy. She walked toward it slowly, as if it were a mirage that might disappear. She saw a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. She reached out with a shaking hand and pulled it loose. The crowd held its breath. Camera shutters clicked like a swarm of locusts. She ripped the envelope open. There was a single key inside, attached to a keychain that was shaped like a star. And a small note. She read the note, and the world spun around her. It wasn't over. The story wasn't over. This wasn't just a tip. This was a miracle. The silver SUV sat in the parking space like it had fallen out of the sky. It was massive, gleaming under the morning sun, with tires that looked thick enough to climb a mountain and windows tinted dark enough to hide a secret. The giant red bow on the hood bobbed slightly in the breeze. It looked ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. The waitress stood there, her feet glued to the pavement. She was holding the key in her hand. It was heavy, made of metal, not the plastic clicker her old broken car used to have. The crowd was murmuring, a low wave of noise that washed over her, but she couldn't make out the words. It all sounded like static. She felt like she was underwater. She looked at the note again. The handwriting was jagged, like it had been written in a moving car or in a rush. "I noticed you walk in the rain. No mom should have to do that. This is a safe car. It has the best safety rating. Keep being kind. K." A sob tore out of her throat, loud and ugly. She pressed the key to her lips, squeezing her eyes shut as the tears finally spilled over. It was too much. It was just too much. The money from yesterday was a miracle, enough to fix her life. But this was a fortress. This was safety. She remembered the way her old car had died on the highway. She remembered the fear of standing on the shoulder with her son while cars zoomed past. She remembered the walk in the rain yesterday, the cold seeping into her bones, the shame of being poor in a city that worshipped money. He had seen all of that. He had seen her struggle, and instead of looking away, he had fixed it. Just then, the door to the diner flew open. The manager rushed out. She was a heavy-set woman who usually looked stern, but today her face was pale with shock. "Did he do this?" the manager asked, breathless. She pointed a shaking finger at the SUV. "Did Keanu Reeves buy you a car?" The waitress could only nod. She held up the key and the note. He said he saw me walking in the rain." The manager covered her mouth with her hand. "I have a letter for you," she said, her voice muffled. "I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a prank." The manager reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp. "A courier dropped it off 10 minutes ago," he said, "for the mother who walks." I didn't know what he meant until now. The waitress took the envelope. Her hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped it. She tore it open. Inside, there was a stack of paperwork. It looked official. Legal. She scanned the page, her eyes jumping over the words, trying to make sense of the legal language. Settlement. Paid in full. Beneficiary. She looked at the top of the page. It was a statement regarding her student loans. She read it again. The balance was 0. She dropped the papers. They fluttered to the wet pavement, but she didn't care. She stared at the manager, her eyes wide, disbelieving. "They're gone," she whispered. "My loans. He paid them off. All of them." The manager gasped. "The student loans, the ones you've been crying about for years." "Every penny," the waitress said. "And, look." She pointed to a smaller piece of paper in the envelope. It was a certificate. "It's a trust fund. For my son's education. It's enough for college. Any college he wants." The manager grabbed the waitress by the shoulders. "You are not going to faint on me. Breathe." The crowd around them had gone silent. The cell phones were still recording, but the people had stopped talking. They were watching a real-life movie unfold. They weren't watching a celebrity, they were watching a moment of pure, unscripted grace. The waitress leaned back against the hood of the new car. The metal was warm from the sun. It felt solid. It felt real. She thought about Keanu. She thought about him sitting in the booth, looking tired and sad. He had everything in the world, yet he spent his time worrying about a stranger. Why her? She thought about the day before. She thought about how she had fed his daughter. She hadn't done it for a reward. She had done it because the little girl reminded her of her own son. She had done it because she saw a dad who was drowning, and she knew how to swim. She realized then that Keanu wasn't just paying a debt. He wasn't just giving away money because he was rich. He was acknowledging a connection. He was saying, "I see your kindness, and I value it more than gold." In a world where people were often ignored, where struggling parents were treated like inconveniences, he had stopped. He had seen her. The waitress wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the crowd. She saw the young kids with their phones, the old couples holding hands, the busy commuters stopping to stare. "He's a good man," she said, her voice clear and loud. "He's a really good dad." She looked at the manager. Can I take the rest of the day off? I need to pick up my son. I want to take him for a ride." The manager laughed, a wet, happy sound. "Yes. Take the week off. Just drive that beautiful machine." The waitress took a deep breath. She unlocked the car with a beep. The lights flashed. She opened the heavy door. The smell of new leather rushed out to greet her, clean, expensive, untouched. It smelled like a fresh start. She climbed into the driver's seat. It was like sitting in a cockpit. Everything was digital and bright. She adjusted the seat, marveling at how easy it moved. She gripped the steering wheel. It felt like she was holding the steering wheel of a spaceship. She sat there for a moment, letting the silence of the car wrap around her. No more walking in the rain. No more broken buses. No more fear that she couldn't provide for her son. She turned the key. The engine purred to life. It didn't cough or sputter. It purred like a giant cat. The vibration of the engine ran through her body, shaking away the last of the cold. She put the car in drive. She rolled down the window. The crowd cheered. It wasn't a screaming fan cheer, it was a cheer of happiness. People were clapping. Some were even crying. Everyone loves a happy ending, especially when it's real. The waitress waved. She put her foot on the gas and eased out of the parking spot. The car glided over the pavement. It was smoother than anything she had ever felt. She drove slowly out of the lot, turning onto the main road. She didn't go straight home. She took the long way. She drove past the bus stop where she used to stand every morning. She saw the people waiting there, huddled under umbrellas. She slowed down. She saw a woman with a stroller, struggling to fold it up while holding a toddler's hand. The waitress pulled over. She didn't know this woman. But she remembered the envelope in her pocket. She still had the cash Keanu had given her yesterday, minus the money she used for rent. She had plenty left. She rolled down the window. "Hey!" she called out. The woman with the stroller looked up, wary. "Do you need a lift?" the waitress asked. "I have room." The woman hesitated, looking at the fancy car, then at the waitress's uniform. "Oh, no, I couldn't." "Please," the waitress said with a smile. "I was just where you are. Not long ago. Get in. It's dry." The woman looked at the rain, then at her crying toddler. She nodded. "Thank you. Really, thank you." They helped her fold the stroller and lift it into the back. They buckled the toddler into the back seat. The woman sat in the passenger seat, sighing with relief as she wiped the rain from her face. "Nice car," the woman said, looking around. "It is," the waitress said. "A friend gave it to me. He told me to pay it forward." She drove the woman to her destination, only a few miles away. When they arrived, the woman thanked her profusely, trying to offer a few dollars for gas. The waitress shook her head. "No," she said. "Just help someone else someday. That's the price." She watched the woman walk away, safe and dry. Then, she turned the car toward her sister's house to pick up her son. When she pulled up, her son was playing on the porch. He saw the car. His mouth dropped open. He ran down the stairs, his eyes wide as saucers. "Mom!" he yelled. Whose car is that? It's ours, buddy, she said, stepping out. It's ours. She picked him up and spun him around. We're going to be okay. We're going to be more than okay. She strapped him into the back seat. He touched the leather seats like they were made of gold. It smells new, he said. It is, she said. She looked at him in the rearview mirror. And we're never going to have to walk in the rain again. She drove home, her heart feeling light as a feather. She knew the news would be everywhere by tonight. The internet would be talking about the actor and the waitress. People would debate the amount of money, or the type of car, or why he did it. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling in her chest. It wasn't just happiness. It was strength. She felt like she could face anything now. She felt like she had an army of one very tall, very kind man standing behind her. When she pulled into her driveway and parked the car, she sat for a moment. She looked at the house she rented. It was small. It needed a new coat of paint. But now, it felt like a palace. Because it was hers. And the debt was gone. She remembered Keanu's tired face in the diner. She hoped he was sleeping. She hoped Luna was having a good day. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled napkin where he had written the first note. She smoothed it out and put it in the glove box, right next to the manual. "Thank you, Keanu," she whispered to the empty car. She got out and opened the door for her son. The sun was coming out from behind the clouds, casting a golden light over the street. It was going to be a beautiful afternoon. She looked up at the sky and smiled. She knew that life would still be hard sometimes. There would still be long shifts and rude customers and bills to pay. But she also knew that kindness was real. It existed in the world, in the form of a man who gave away cars, and a waitress who fed a stranger's daughter. And she knew that she would never stop paying it forward. As long as she lived, she would be the one to offer a hand. Because she knew, better than anyone, that sometimes a hand is all you need to pull yourself out of the rain. She walked toward her front door, holding her son's hand, ready to start the rest of her life.